you very much, Governor. It's great to be back here at the Global Forum. It's a terrific series and always enjoyed our discussions here. I thought that maybe the thing I could do that would be most useful at the beginning here, since I come to this more as a reporter than a true academic studying these issues in the South China Sea, though we try to take them up in a Harvard course at Grant Allison I teach, is to talk a little bit about the events that led up to the summit meeting between President Obama and President Xi just 2.5 weeks ago, and how this issue played there, where it factored into the meeting, and where we think it's headed. So, as President Xi was preparing for this meeting and President Obama was trying to set the agenda for it, it was clear that there were some areas where they would be able to announce some significant progress. Climate change was the one that was the easiest because it required the Chinese merely to re-announce some things that they were already planning to go do anyway. That the hardest issue was going to be cyber. The next topic that is Governor Takaka said will be taking up here, and that the one in which they were likely to make the least progress was the South China Sea issue. And that's essentially how it worked out. And I'll come back to that in a moment. But the subtext of the entire discussion between President Obama and President Xi was to try to figure out whether or not Mr. Xi himself would be in a position to actually make many compromises, whether they could get a better read on the question of why they had misunderstood when President Xi first came to power 2 years ago, how aggressive he would be on these territorial issues. Remember, when President Xi took over, he had come to the United States just a few months before, taken a tour with Vice President Biden, went back to the house in Iowa where he had visited as a young party official, said all the right things. And many in the Obama White House thought that he was going to pursue the line that Hu Jintao's state counselor, Dai Binghua, had written about at the end of President Hu's time, which was basically an essay that said, don't challenge the United States right now or any other major power. Focus on the domestic economy, consolidate your power, but follow what Deng Xiaoping would tell us to do, which was basically bide our time. The moment will come to deal with all these issues. And most of the intelligence reports that were floating around to the White House, the State Department, the Defense Department, strongly seemed to suggest that the United States thought Xi would do exactly that. That they had it wrong. They got right the Xi Jinping that wanted to go deal with corruption, with consolidating his power. They got wrong the risk-taker side of Xi. And so what did we see happen? We saw a huge rise in the cyber attacks, which were going on anyway at this time. And then we also saw a significant rise in the activity in the South China Sea, including the building of the islands of the pictures therefore. They're not really islands, I guess I would say, building military facilities on half-submerged reefs. The president decided to try to deal with cyber first, and that didn't go anywhere at his first meetings with President Xi, which were at Sunnylands. And in the area of the territorial challenges, the first thing that the president had to go face was the declaration of the air defense identification zone that the Chinese had declared over a very broad area. And the U.S. response to that was to immediately send some B-52s right through the middle of the zone in order to make the point that the U.S. didn't recognize this. But with the islands, they've been much more cautious. There have been a number of naval activities around these this new construction, but nothing that went inside the 12-mile limit that the Chinese declared, because the Chinese, of course, are playing the game of saying that this is truly their territory, and therefore they've got 12 miles around it. The Navy and the new head of PACOM, Admiral Harry Harris, pressed very hard internally to send one of those missions within 12 miles prior to the Xi visit. And this was rejected by the White House for fear that it would poison the atmosphere of the visit and force the Chinese to take some kind of harder line than they thought was necessary. All of the indications we have now is that that mission to go inside the 12-mile area or within 12 miles of these reefs is likely to happen in the next few weeks, now that the visit is over. That Admiral Harris won his point, he just didn't win his timing. Now, the bigger question is the one that Bob Gates used to put so wonderfully whenever some kind of major project was proposed for the military, where he used to say that the three words least asked in Washington are, "and then what?" And the interesting question for the Navy right now, as they get ready to go inside these limits, is the "and then what" question. Because it's not at all clear to us at this point how the Chinese are going to respond. The betting is that the Chinese will harass and follow these ships, but won't do anything that is overtly hostile. But it is a big game of chicken, because the Chinese have looked at President Obama and calculated quite rightly that we're not going to risk a military conflict for a group of reefs that until 2 years ago were largely of interest for fishing purposes. And they've got that right. If you look across the range of the activities that President Obama has engaged in or not, he has very much followed the light footprint strategy. That is to say, he's willing to use cyber assets, he's willing to go use drones, he's willing to arm rebels occasionally and train allies, whether they are the Iraqis or others, but he's not willing to go be in a position that's going to risk a significant conflict. In this particular case, I think they're calculating that Xi isn't willing to risk it either. I mean, Xi's got other problems right now. And what made this summit particularly fascinating, it was the first one in years, you might argue 2 decades, in which a Chinese leader showed up in Washington in a position of weakness rather than one of strength, largely out of the economic downturn, which has led us to question whether or not the length and degree of support that Xi Jinping has is as great as we initially were saying, or even were saying 6 months ago when people were making the case that he's the strongest Chinese leader since Deng Xiaoping. So that's the situation that we are headed into now. I think the president wants very much to make the point that we do not recognize this territory as Chinese territory. At the press conference with President Xi, he went out of his way to say the United States will fully respect international law on these issues and expects the Chinese to as well. And that was interpreted by the Chinese as a sign that he would in fact start the mission up that they're going to head into. I think the bigger question is, can you keep this issue from becoming a very big one in the relationship? And can you persuade the Chinese that most of what they're doing right now is taking the other regional players and driving them right into the American camp? And the American argument is that's just what happens. This is happening now. The Filipinos are talking about reopening a version of Clark Air Base. To do that, they're going to have to throw FedEx out of Clark Air Base. Good luck with that. The Vietnamese had been suddenly very interested in talks with the United States. And here we had the remarkable sight just a few months ago of a leader of the Vietnamese Communist Party sitting in the Oval Office having a nice chat and a cup of coffee with the President of the United States. for anybody in the room old enough to remember Vietnam. That is a pretty mind-bending concept. So I think over the next year or two, the United States sees a moment, not necessarily of the upper hand, but certainly of some leverage here. And that's something probably worth our exploring. I think I've probably gone longer than I promised the governor I would, so I will leave it at that, but I hope this gives you a little bit of a snapshot of where we are today.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you.